let me be the dessert to this feast of science and tell you something about the efficient management of human-centric cell-less 6G networks. For this work, I would like to recognize my colleagues from CNR, Emma Chiaramello, Alessandro Nordio, Marta Parazzini, Professor Carla Chiaserini from CNIT, as well as Alvaro from Nokia. So this is truly joint work. The scenario that we consider for this work is something called cell-less mobile networks. So it is a view and evolution of present-day cellular networks which do not have cells. Why? Because due to the need of for performance on the one hand and also customization on the other hand, the notion of cell, so an area served exclusively by one base station, becomes too constrained. It is not flexible enough to have that. So cells disappear, or they get blurred, and they are replaced by something that is called point of uh, a point of access. So points of access can belong to different technologies, different generations. So you can have LTE base stations coexisting with, for example, millimeter wave. They can have different frequencies. They may belong to different owners. So this has, of course, a very significant advantage, which is the flexibility, because now every user can be served by multiple points of access, maybe also at the same time, contemporarily, and then it gets connected with MIMO. On the negative side, of course, managing this type of network, which means choosing the point or points of access to serve each user and also configuring these points of access. Many have, for example, beamforming capabilities. Well, managing this type of system becomes very complex. So the input and output of the problem that we consider are as follows. We consider a cell-less network scenario similar to the one we have discussed, and we consider both the users of the network, so the entities that need to get data, and the humans which are affected by the network. Notice that not all the users of the network will be humans. For example, we have robots over there, and not all the humans in the network area will also be users of the network. We have in that picture just a person passing by on the way from a point of access to a user. So the decisions that we have to make are the ones we mentioned earlier. So choosing the right point of access to serve each user, configuring the points of access which allow such configuration, also deciding the transmission powers. And the interesting thing is that we take what is called a human-centric approach. This is emerging in different fields. And the idea is performance. This is linked to what Septimia was mentioning also earlier. Performance is not anymore, or not necessarily, or not always our only goal. So performance expressed through traditional metrics like throughput becomes a constraint for us. So we must guarantee that users get the data rate that they need, of course. We must guarantee we will discuss this better in the following. We must guarantee that we obey exposure constraints. Subjects to the above, we want to optimize a human-centric metric expressing somehow the impact of the network on the surrounding environment, the people, and so on. And in this work, we consider probably the most basic, the most popular human-centric metric, which is minimizing the energy consumption. Of course, like we mentioned, decisions are complex, so we cannot directly optimize. Now we have this work was also published at a conference, and we have a journal publication also submitted. So we have a system model with our variables. It is too complicated to directly solve them through a solver. Therefore, we follow the approach summarized in this figure, which is predicated upon decoupling the decisions. And because also our input data, which we have seen earlier, is composed of multiple entities, what we do is we decouple the decisions, we separate the inputs, and then for every step of the decision-making process, we use one of the elements of the input. In this case, we have step one, we consider the end users, we cluster them. So we do not make decisions considering the individual users anymore, we group them into clusters. Then in the second step of the algorithm, we enlarge our focus, we consider points of access, and we match points of access with clusters of end users. And this is simplified by the fact that we have clustered the end users. So we are not matching points of access with users, we are matching points of access with clusters. Then step three, we consider the humans, we bring them back into the picture, and we optimize both the power of the points of access and also, for those that allow that, the width of the beam. So the idea is each individual step of the algorithm is simpler than it would be to just solve everything altogether. Of course, we are not obtaining optimal solutions because the problem is NP hard and so on. But the idea is we are able to account for the mutual interference between different decisions and still get very high quality decisions. To verify that, we consider a fairly typical scenario. So we consider an indoor factory, which is one of the scenarios standardized in these 3GPP technical reports. We have both non-human network users, which can be, for example, robots operating in the factory, and humans who are not users of the network, which could be the factory workers. We have 8 points of access operating at 2 different frequencies, 3 gigahertz, which is present day 5G, what is normally marketed as 5G. 5 gigahertz is the same frequency as Wi-Fi, and so we also are moving toward the scenario with multiple technologies. Users have a rate requirement, which is 100 megabits per second. For EMF exposure, we consider limits standardized by ICNIRP, which is an international commission dealing with this type of issues, and we evaluate these limits with the help of two, they call them phantoms. They are essentially CT scans from volunteers, which are used to estimate the effect on the human tissues coming from wireless transmissions. Because they are, I mean, they come from real people, they have names. So the two phantoms that we consider are called Duke and Ella. We have a benchmark strategy which represents the traditional approach of, let me say blindly, maximizing the throughput. So we don't consider the fact that for us throughput is a constraint. We just want to maximize that. And in these plots, we see um, the two main quantities. So on the top, we see the data rate. Our solution is represented by the blue line. State of the art is uh, represented by the red line. We can see that the state of the art gives a higher data rate than our solution, but this is useless because both our solution and the state of the art are consistent with the minimum rate requirement. In the bottom plot, we have the EMF exposure expressed through a metric which is called specific absorption rate. And similarly to the top plot, the yellow line is the ICNIRP limit, reference value, I should say. The state of the art corresponds to a higher exposure than our own solution. Also, notice that the scale on the x-axis here is logarithmic, so we are orders of magnitude better than the state of the art. And at the same time, we should mention that even the state of the art is still almost one order of magnitude away from the limit. So it's not that we are risking going above the limit in the state of the art. We cannot say that, but still we are having a higher than necessary exposure. In this slide, we try to better understand why, where these results come from, and more specifically, we see, you remember, we mentioned that there are two frequencies, 3 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So in these two plots, every marker corresponds to one end user. The position of the marker corresponds to the data rate and the interfering power felt by that user, and then the color and shape of the marker represent how that particular user is served. Top is our solution, bottom is the state of the art. And we can see that the state of the art tends to use mostly the 3 gigahertz frequency, so the lower frequency, whereas we are able to use to a much more significant extent the higher frequency, so the 5 gigahertz. Intuitively, the reason is that this type of these frequencies and then the technologies using these frequencies, they are more subject to interference, they are more subject to blockage. So intuitively, they are harder to use. So our algorithm is better at accounting for the limitations, the specific problems of this frequency. Therefore, we are able to use them to a more significant extent. And next, we, in keeping, of course, with the general theme of the project, we see how to combine our algorithm with artificial intelligence and more specifically reinforcement learning. So we compare two main approaches. Oh, sorry. On the left-hand side, we have a popular approach of basically replacing everything with a big DNN, in this case, a big reinforcement learning algorithm, and making all the decisions. So you remember the direction of the beams, the width of the beam, the power of the points of access, everything with the reinforcement learning. the right-hand side approach shows a more nuanced, a more complicated approach, trying to combine reinforcement learning with our CTM, our algorithm. And specifically, we use reinforcement learning to make some decisions, specifically the direction of the beams, and then we retain our algorithm to make the other decisions for the power and the beam width. So in a way, we keep our solution to refine the decisions made by reinforcement learning. And in this plot, we see our main metric of interest, so the total power used by the network. The blue dashed line corresponds to our algorithm, so the version without any reinforcement learning. The purple bars correspond to the approach where we replace everything with reinforcement learning, and the green bars correspond to the approach where we combine them. And we see that, as we might expect, but actually as we were hoping, combining algorithm and artificial intelligence technologies, techniques, works better than trying to replace them. On the x-axis, you see these numbers are the number of training epochs. And we can see that, yes, VRL only, so the approach where we only have reinforcement learning, does converge. Now, it looks like it will eventually catch up, but it takes 20,000 epochs to get close. So in a practical scenario, we may or may not have 20,000 epochs. We may or may not have the data necessary for the training. So yes, in principle, you could replace, in this case, our algorithm with reinforcement learning, but in practice, it is much more productive and much more efficient to look for a way to combine them. But in a more philosophical, if you like, way, this is what we do with artificial intelligence in our everyday life. Now, it is very helpful if we combine that with human intelligence of one sort or the other. It gets cumbersome when we think it can replace human-made things. So in conclusion, we have addressed the problem of managing cell-less networks following a human-centric paradigm whereby performance, like throughput, becomes a constraint, and our optimization objective is a human-centric metric like energy consumption. We have proposed a scheme called clustered and mesh. We have evaluated its performance and found out that it was good. And we have also explored how to jointly use our scheme with artificial intelligence, finding that the best thing we can do about that, the more promising way we can go about that is combining the two, and making the remark that, in fact, this is also how we use all different types of AI. So with this, I thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I will be very happy to take them.